Great. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 7th County of Los Angeles Citizen Redistricting Commission regular public meeting for 2021. Today is March 24th, 2021, and the time is 7:05 p.m. We will now call the meeting to order. As a reminder to the public, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to youtube.com/LA County Redistricting. The link to the recording will also be posted and accessible through the Los Angeles County Redistricting website. If at any time any members of the public have any technical difficulties, please message me, Kathay, and we can work towards fixing the issue. As a reminder for members of the public interested in making a comment, please click on the Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar and enter into the Q&A section the following information. A, that you are interested in making a public comment. B, your name. C, the organization you are affiliated with, if any. And D, which agenda item you would like to make a public comment on. When you are called to make your public comment, you will be prompted to unmute your mic so you can speak. I will now take the roll. As a reminder, commissioner names will be called in a rotating alphabetical order by last name. Commissioners, please be prepared to unmute your mic and respond when your name is called. Commissioner Apollonia Morales. Commissioner Apollonia Morales.
Present, sorry.
No problem.
Clicking around.
Commissioner Nelson Obregon.
Present.
Commissioner Priscilla Orpanella Segura.
Here.
Commissioner Haile Soto.
Present.
Commissioner Saira Soto.
Present.
Commissioner Priya Sridharan.
Present.
Commissioner Brian Stetcher.
Present.
Commissioner John Vento.
Present.
Co-Chair Carolyn Williams.
Present.
Commissioner Dorina Wong.
Here.
Commissioner Jean Franklin.
Present.
Commissioner David Holtzman.
Here.
Co-Chair Daniel Maeda.
Present.
And Commissioner Mark Mendoza.
Present.
Thank you. I will now turn the agenda over to Co-Chair Williams.
Thank you, Ty. We will move to the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes for the agenda? If not, the agenda is approved. So let's move to number 4, public comments. Can you review the process, Ty, for us?
Of course. So as a reminder for members of the public interested in making a comment, please click on the Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar and enter into the Q&A section the following information. A, that you are interested in making a public comment. B, your name. C, the organization you are affiliated with, if any. And D, which agenda item you would like to make a public comment on. When you are called to make a public comment, you will be prompted to unmute your mic so you can speak. And for discussion items, the approach will be, first, the item will be introduced. Then a staff will present a staff report or a PowerPoint if used. Then the commissioners can ask clarifying questions of staff during or after the presentation. Then public comments on that specific item is held. Then public comment is closed. And then the commission will discuss, debate, and vote on any particular items. So we'll take just a moment here, just in case there are any members of the public who are interested in making a general public comment.
And Ty, while they're putting into Q&A any of their comments, I think we should note that there were no written public correspondence received by the Executive Office of LA County. The other thing we'd like to announce to the public, if you don't want to make an oral written comment, I see a couple people raise their hands that they do want to make an oral comment. If you just want to make a written comment, we are going to be using a different form that's attached to our website, which you're welcome to use for this meeting, and we will begin launching this and using this in future meetings. And the way this form basically works is this is the link, and it goes to our website. And whenever we have a meeting, you can put in your name, your address, your organization. You can attach up to 5 documents. And then if you scroll down this, you'll see we actually put the agenda here. So you could click on, I want to make a comment about the presentation that you're going to have tonight with Kathay Feng of Common Cause, and you could write in your comment. This will help the commission as we proceed, particularly with public hearings, and they will be receiving dozens and dozens of public comments. So we would encourage you to start using this form tonight if you want to submit written comments, but also as we go forward. Again, it's on our website, and it's available at publiccomment.redistricting.lacounty.gov. So I'll turn it back to you, Ty, if there are any raised hands.
Great. Thank you. We do have one raised hand, but typically we do ask members of the public if they are interested in making a public comment to enter in their name into the Q&A. Co-Chair Williams and Co-Chair Maeda, how would you like to proceed? We do have a hand up by one of the attendees.
Okay. Can that attendee, we'd like to hear from that attendee.
Okay, great. So Gail Stewart, I will allow you to talk. You'll be prompted by Zoom to unmute yourself. When you unmute yourself and begin speaking, you will have 2 minutes to make your public comment. And Gayla, will you be taking time for this?
Yeah, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a comment in reference to your letter to the legislator regarding your changing the primary election date. And my question is that part of your values and duties? Is that your responsibility to request that the primary election date be changed? The president of the United States couldn't change the election date, so why would you want to do it? That has nothing to do with the redistricting. So my comment is, if I have to get a petition and get a bunch of signatures to submit to the legislature, I think this is over beyond your call of duty of what your function is. Your problem, your reason is because of certain duties or functions you have to do. That's a personal issue of the committee. It's not a problem of the voters. That's your personal problem, and you need to adjust your duties accordingly. I'm done.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Holtzman here. Let me just briefly respond. We've pretty much dropped that idea for now. And you're right, it was an idea so we could get our duties done more carefully. But we've pretty much dropped that idea for now. Thank you for noticing it. Thank you.
There are currently no other public comment for this item.
So shall we go on to Co-Chair Maeda with the minutes?
Yes, good evening. Now is the time to consider approving the minutes for the March 10th, 2021 regular meeting of the commission. Those minutes have been circulated. Are there any comments, questions, changes on those minutes? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Sorry, was that Commissioner Haile Soto?
Yes.
And Commissioner Stetcher seconds?
Yes.
Is there any further discussion? Ty, can you take roll then on voting to approve these minutes?
So now, I'm sorry, Commissioner Holtzman has his hand up.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Holtzman.
Commissioner
You're
Holtzman,
muted.
you're muted.
Okay, here we go. I'm unmuted. Sorry, I noticed that my vote on the values at the end was recorded incorrectly. I voted present or abstain.
Without objection, with those minutes, that change could be made on the minutes. Any other questions, corrections, comments? So there's a motion on the table by Commissioner Haile Soto and seconded by Commissioner Stetcher to approve the minutes. If there's no further discussion, Ty, can you go ahead and call the roll?
I will now take roll call. Commissioners, please be prepared to unmute your mic and respond when your name is called. Commissioner Nelson Obregon,
Yes.
Commissioner Priscilla Orpanella Segura,
Yes.
Commissioner Haile Soto,
Yes.
Commissioner Saira Soto,
Yes.
Commissioner Priya Shidara,
Yes.
Commissioner Brian Stetcher,
Yes.
Commissioner John Bento,
Yes.
Co-Chair Carolyn Williams,
Yes.
Commissioner Dorina Wong,
Yes.
Commissioner Jean Franklin,
Yes.
Commissioner David Holtz,
Yes.
Co-Chair Daniel Maeda,
Yes.
Commissioner Mark Mendoza,
Aye.
Commissioner Apollonia Morales.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, everybody. Next item is to hear from our next presenter, expert on the subject of redistricting. And I'll introduce the lead of the Education Committee, Commissioner Mendoza, if you could introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Co-Chair Maeda. We are honored to have with us this evening Ms. Kathay Feng, Esquire. Ms. Feng has an illustrious career, which includes heading the Voting Rights and Anti-Discrimination Unit of the Asian Pacific American Legal Center, serving on numerous boards, committees, commissions in the furtherance of voter participation, human relations, anti-discrimination, etc. Presently, Ms. Feng is the National Redistricting Director for Common Cause, an organization that works to create ethical and open government, promote free speech and accountability in media, and many more worthy causes. Ms. Feng has an Ivy League education and a wealth of experience that I have no doubt will be put to good use tonight in her presentation. Ms. Feng, please.
Hi, everyone. Let me just double check and make sure that folks can hear me. Get a wave. Oh, fantastic. Okay. Well, let me just start out by taking a quick moment without the PowerPoint to say, I want to thank each and every one of you for serving as commissioners. You will no doubt find that you will be faced with a lot of hard decisions, a lot of long conversations. As you're just starting out right now, a lot of learning. And what I am going to appreciate you for is that you're not only serving the community of Los Angeles County, you are setting the standard for the rest of the country. Not to put too much weight on you, but there is an active conversation right now about whether or not regular citizens like yourselves are intelligent enough, are deliberative enough, are public serving enough to serve in the role of commissioners who can draw these redistricting lines as an example for many other states and counties. And so to the extent that you're embarking on this, know that we are all so proud of you and we want to thank you for your service. I would like to ask for my PowerPoint to be pulled up if that's possible. Thank you. All right. Let's go on to the next slide.
Kathy, I'm going to ask,
Yes, ma'am.
actually, because you emailed me the PowerPoint the last minute, the wrong one popped up. So let me reopen that for you. 'Cause
Okay.
you want the other one.
No
for
problem.
information. So,
Yes,
so let me go through this.
if it's possible. Thank you. No worries.
Want to get you the right one.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yep, that looks like the right one. Okay, so let's go to the first slide. I understand that you've had a presentation from Justin Levitt, Professor Levitt, and what I'll say is it's like you dove straight in to law school, and now I'm going to back you up a little bit. And we're going to start with the basics. And that is, of course, you all know that every 10 years we have the census and we count each person who lives in a place in the United States, right? And so this last year in 2020, we did the census, and I'm just going to mention that this time census was highly unusual, as you all know. We normally would start the census in April of 2020. That's the big census day. And then there is this calendar that usually happens like clockwork, where the data is released a certain number of months after that, and then everybody kind of goes forward in 2021 to engage in redistricting. We will look at a calendar a little bit later, but what I want to just note is that this year's census, or 2020 census, was very irregular because of COVID, because of a lot of changes in what the Census Bureau had to do to accommodate the fact that people were not supposed to be out knocking on doors or engaging in the public. And so as a result, their entire timeline shifted. I understand that you all have begun talking about that, and that may be a useful conversation for us to continue at the end of this. But I just want to say this year's census, we counted everyone, but it took us a little bit longer. Census lasted until October 15th of 2020. And that stretch of time then has also meant that the Census Bureau is taking much more time to reconcile all of the data that's come back. So we count everyone. Next slide. And we are looking to figure out where people live, in part because in redistricting, we then take that total number of people who live within a place, and then depending on what we're drawing for, in this case, the County Board of Supervisors, we take the total number of people, we divide it by the number of seats that we're drawing for, and we get an ideal number. Next slide. Right. So in this imaginary jurisdiction, we have 16 people, and we've gone and divided that. 16 divided by 4 equals 4. And so each district will have an ideal number of 4 people. Now, that ideal number is something where there can be some deviation. Obviously, in the real world, in LA County, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, and several million people in the entire county, but hundreds of thousands in any one Board of Supervisors seat. But when you get down to a very specific number, you are shooting for as close to equal as possible between districts, understanding that sometimes there are other priorities like keeping minority communities together or other communities together that may require you to deviate from that ideal number in order to satisfy some of those requirements. And at the county level, you're allowed to do that. Next slide. Now, over time, those districts can become uneven in population. Why is that? Totally natural reasons that people will move from, let's say, the coast inland because of housing prices, right? We experienced the housing collapse in the middle of the decade. There may be more births or deaths in some places. And so the number of people within a district will become uneven. And so next slide, we take a census once again, we count everyone, and then we redraw those lines to make sure that there's an equal number of people in each district. And in our imaginary city, we've grown from 16 to 20 people now, next. And so we're redrawing those lines now to make sure that each district now has 5 people in it. Pausing for a second, this is a fundamental reason why we do redistricting. We are trying to draw districts that have an equal number of people. You will see the phrase equipopulation. I think that Justin Levitt may have covered that. Sometimes that is associated with the phrase one person, one vote. When we do this, the number that we're looking at is the total number of people who live in LA County. It's sort of not more or less. But I just do want to just double check that we're good with this basic concept. Very good. Next slide. Okay, so the way that the lines are drawn can and have in the past been used to take away minority voting rights. The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965 because it recognized that there are certain minorities, racial minorities, who have historically been discriminated against in terms of having voting rights taken away. And one of the ways that voting rights can be taken away is by drawing the lines in ways that dilutes those voters' ability to elect a candidate of their choice. All right, so you see here, again, we're back to an imaginary 16 people in a community or in a city. And it just so happens that 3 minorities live in the city center, and then 1 sort of on the outskirts. And so you could say, hey, we want to draw these lines in perfect squares. Oftentimes you will hear this term compactness, right? Why don't we just draw perfectly compact districts? And if you were to do that next, you might find that the way that the lines end up getting drawn is that they would split that community next into 4 equal parts, where the minority community that is centered in the center of the city is in fact split into 1 of 4 districts, and thereby cannot all by themselves elect a candidate of their choice. Next slide. When people organize and when they come to you and talk to you about their community, one of the key things that they want to do is to be able to let you know where we are on the map, so that those kinds of inadvertent, or sometimes in some places maybe purposeful, silencing of voters' choices cannot happen. So next. If we're conscious where those communities are, it is possible for us to then keep those communities whole, right? Now, the Voting Rights Act, as Justin explained, thinks of 2 different sides of this. One is cracking and one is packing. I'm not going to go into too much detail because you've got a nice overview of that. And those are things that if you have additional questions, you can ask. But the key thing is that you want to think about this concept, both for compliance of the Voting Rights Act, where you've got a formula that you're looking at. You know, do they meet certain 3 prongs that are required? But also with the more generalized concept of communities of interest. And we will talk about that in a little bit greater detail. Think about communities of interest. In some places, what that is sort of neighborhoods, right? But it can also be other concepts. And I'll talk a little bit about that so that you can have a feel for the different ways that you can define a community of interest. Next. Okay. So if you haven't taken a peek at these slides already, and you don't know what the next one is, I'm wondering if anybody wants to take a guess at where this picture is from. I see Commissioner Mendoza thinking, like, could this be Minnesota?
It's Watts.
It's Watts. Okay. Well, I'll say somebody knows, but when I give this presentation in other places lately, people have been saying, is it like Houston, Texas? But it is in fact from Watts. Next slide. This is a picture of Watts in 2003. There was a freak hailstorm and snowstorm that hit the community of Watts. And as you all know, in Southern California, this is not the kind of precipitation that we are prepared for. And so over 150 houses and buildings were crushed in this community. People had to move into emergency shelters. The roads were blocked, and there was a lot of rebuilding that had to be done. But when people went to their electeds, at the first response was, no, we're so sorry, we can't really help you. And it took a lot of organizing from the community just to get a response to something that in most situations would be an immediate emergency, federal emergency and state emergency declared, and you'd have people coming to help out from government. Next slide. So you ask yourself, why is that? Well, in 2001, when the community of Watts, or when the lines were drawn for congressional and Senate and Assembly, unfortunately, what happened was that the community of Watts was split into 3 different pieces. And here in the shaded green is where the community of Watts is. This is a neighborhood that, for those of you who haven't had the honor and privilege of visiting, it's a historically African-American community with a very large, fast-growing Latino community. And working class faces a lot of challenges, and probably the hardest thing is when they had a huge need, an obvious need. One of the biggest challenges was that they were split into 3 different districts. Those are the red lines. And so if they went to congressional member in District 35, the congressional member took a look at how many people lived in their district, and they said, well, you're not really in our district. Maybe you should try District 37. And so on and so forth. And so they were sort of ping-ponged, bounced between different districts, trying to get some type of assistance. Next slide. That happened not only at the congressional level, but also at the state Senate level. Now, when those leaders unified to testify about Watts before the California Citizens Commission in 2011, Watts was made whole. And that's so important because that's really, if you think about it, that's what your jobs are, is to listen to those stories, to make sure that the communities that are that have been living in Southern California, that they're really heard. Sometimes those communities, they didn't start out divided, but over the course of a decade, they became divided by districts. Sometimes they've always been split by districts, and they're just asking to be recognized. Next slide. We talked to Romulo Rivera, who was a former congressional staffer who worked in one of those offices, and he actually remembers at the time of that 2003 flood and snowstorm that his office had gotten a lot of inquiries from residents, and it was heartbreaking because he said he remembered having to turn away people because, again, the community was split into three, and they sort of said, maybe it's some other congressional member that needs to represent you. He said this would never have happened if Watts all belonged to one district. Next slide. Now, I want to tell you about another story, and this is just a little bit more detail about what you need to think about when you think about communities of interest, right? I'm going to pick on the communities that are in Long Beach. Some of you may know this area well. I'm using mostly historical examples so that we're not pointing a finger at anybody that you might know right now. But in 2001, there was a legislator who was trying to decide which district they wanted to be drawn into. It could have been 28, could have been 25, could have been 27. They ultimately decided on 28. And so what the legislature did, because they were in charge of drawing the lines at that time, they ended up extending a little boot into Long Beach. And that boot then caused the other districts in 25 and 27 to have to essentially skirt around the boot, right? And you can see how the community of Long Beach, which is really exactly where that boot is, got split into three different districts. Okay, now for those of you who are familiar with Long Beach, you know that the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles are right there on the southern edge. It's those the jagged lines that are kind of extending into the ocean. And from that port are some freeways that extend up, including the 710 freeway. And the 110 freeway in the 710 is, I think, in light blue. And that 710 freeway runs right from the ports. Thank you, arrow, magic arrow. Runs right from the ports up to, all parts of the United States as 18-wheeler trucks are unloading those containers off of the big ships and bringing them all around the country to supply our various stores and retail, right? But think about the communities who live in that area. So where there are the darkest reds are African-American communities and oranges, but as well, there is a fairly large Latinx community that lives in this area. And that community is, again, split three ways along this corridor. Next slide. So this is the kind of testimony that might come to you to say, Long Beach as a city should be held together. But if you think about some of the neighborhoods, there are parts of Long Beach that have fairly significant African-American and Latinx populations, right? And if you're thinking about culture, we could talk about some of those neighborhoods that have a mix of, for instance, working class Latinx families, where if you were to go to any one of those community gatherings, you'd hear a lot of Spanish spoken, right? So you want to listen for stories that tell you about what a neighborhood's culture is. And sometimes that is ethnically based or racially based language spoken. Sometimes it's something totally different. It might be like Silver Lake that says, we like our really cute shops, that cater to an eclectic audience, right? So culture of that neighborhood or of that community is important. Second C to think about is concerns. So here, I just told you about a freeway, 710, that goes up from the ports. And that freeway, as a result of kind of going through these communities, also has a lot of traffic. We all know the 710 has traffic, but also all those 18-wheelers are spewing a lot of pollution. And so this area is actually sometimes nicknamed Asthma Alley. And there are stories that come from the community talking about how their children can't play outside. There's a high incidence of asthma. And, as we heard from some people, there were times when they had to bring their children to the hospital multiple times in a week because their children would wake up coughing because of asthma and the pollution outside. Right? So thinking about what does it mean when a community is divided into 3 different districts, and where if you wanted to talk about the impact of the 710, the problem is that the people who are impacted live in several different districts. So it's hard for them to unify their voices, to talk to their legislative representative or their county board of supervisor, to tell them, hey, this is an issue and we'd like it to be addressed. And then lastly, think about counts. So sometimes communities will come to you and they will tell you about how a neighborhood is particularly impacted because of numbers that they present. That may be a high unemployment number, or as the story that I just shared, 29% of the households in this area have at least one adult who has asthma. Those kinds of numbers start to shape for you a picture about a group of people who share culture, concerns, and counts. And because their representation would benefit from being all put into a single district, it's worth you thinking about so that you can unify that community and they can better be able to elect candidates of their choice, or when issues come up, appeal to their representative for changes in policy or things that might improve their living conditions. Next slide. I want to pause for a second and just ask if folks have any questions after that. We covered communities of interest.
Yeah, so we have 2 commissioners with questions with their hands up. We have Commissioner Stetcher, then Commissioner Vento.
Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. I want to ask about jurisdictions, because one of our charges is to try to keep cities and other jurisdictions whole. And the 2 examples you presented, if I'm right, Watts is not a city. It's a little part of Los Angeles, but Long Beach is a city. In those 2 cases, how would we weigh that? Or what in thinking about the examples that you gave us?
There's not a perfect example or answer to this, but what I will say is that the larger the jurisdiction, the more that you're going to have to take into consideration that you may need to split it into more than one district, right? And as a result, what you're going to want to do is pay attention to the community of interest testimony to figure out where you're going to draw that line. So not to pick on Los Angeles County, but as the largest, city within Los Angeles County, obviously with a large city like that, it may be that when it's all said and done, some parts of LA City, or you have to divide that city, right? And it may be just carving off the edges. It may be sort of finding some other natural splits, but you're looking for kind of where, based on the testimony, you're not inadvertently cutting through a community. Now let's talk about our medium-sized cities like Pasadena and Long Beach. There, generally speaking, you're going to, again, listen to the testimony. Sometimes a medium-sized city, there's going to be a lot of testimony that says, you know what, north of the something something, we're totally like this, and south of the something something, we're totally different, right? And there are natural reasons why, whatever that is, a street, a freeway, or something else, people say, we're actually, north of a something something, we kind of fit more with this area, right? And so splitting cities is not necessarily a total no-no. If you have to do so, either for making sure that your districts have equal population, and or because the testimony is telling you, actually, a city is a city, but there's a natural dividing line. Oftentimes, though, you'll want to keep that city together because a lot of people come to you and say, you know what, we're building a bike lanes, throughout our city, and we're really trying to be a bike-friendly city. And it's really a priority for us. And if you divide us, it'll be harder for us to talk to our representative to secure, the kinds of policy approvals, that allow for that to happen. And what I'll say is that, especially in many parts of the county outside of Los Angeles and the larger cities, you have a lot of medium-sized and smaller cities that you're ultimately going to have to decide how you're putting together, almost like puzzle pieces, in order to make up the total population of a county supervisorial seat. And so there, the only reason why you're splitting some of those smaller cities is because, again, you're running into a situation where you can't put them all together and have equal population. And so there might be some parts of a city that have to come out. But I'll tell the story of Pennsylvania, where Pennsylvania was ordered by the courts to redraw their lines. And the Pennsylvania legislature, I imagine them crossing their arms and saying, how dare you tell us that we need to redraw our lines? We're not going to. And so then the court stepped in and said, okay, fine, we're going to order a special master to come in. But unfortunately, the special master only had a few days to draw those lines and didn't have a chance to take public testimony. And while that special master drew fabulous lines, generally speaking, from a 30,000 foot level, what the special master inadvertently did, because they weren't able to take testimony, was to split a community in West Philly of African-American neighborhood. And the community struggled because they said, now east of this line, some of us belong in this district, and west of this line, some of us belong in another district. And that was a tough thing. What we're really hoping to ask this commission to do is to listen to the testimony, so that if you have to make hard decisions, and nobody's going to be 100% satisfied, but if you have to make hard decisions, it's really trying to respect the testimony that's coming from residents.
Commissioner Vento, then Commissioner Holtzman, and Co-Chair Williams.
Kathay, thank you so much for coming. I've seen a couple of your presentations. I appreciate the information. Gail, is it possible you could go back just one slide to the Long Beach one, the port one? And I really appreciate this. And this is a question that just popped into my mind, okay? So when you're talking about this problem about Asthma Highway and everything like this, and Long Beach is divided up in that one particular area, there's 3 different supervisors. Kathay, just from a voting perspective, it would seem like that, since that area is being divided up into 3 areas, they could get 3 votes to bring the change.
Yeah.
And so so this is where I'm just trying to understand something. From a voting perspective, that seems like a good thing, right? So we could get 3 supervisors on ballot to change it, and as opposed to clumping this one area into one supervisor, which is a serious problem. Now you have 3 votes. So that almost seems like it's more beneficial. And that's what I'm just trying to understand. Is this something that would be beneficial, or would be something like, I guess that's what I'm just trying to understand the rationale here, because it just seems logical that if there's an asthma highway, get the 3 commissioners on board to make the changes that they need to do to protect these people.
Right. I will note that these are legislative seats that you're looking at, but your question is a good one, right? And there's not an easy answer. In this instance, what was happening was the representative the 2 who represented the ports didn't feel directly connected to the majority of the population that was impacted by the freeway's pollution and traffic. And so in a lot of ways, they're sort of like, well, I got the asset of the ports, right? But not necessarily all of the downsides. And so in that sense, not that, I don't know that it was malicious so much as it's not my problem. And you saw in the example of Watts where, again, you might have congressional staff who their hearts are, really feeling for the people who came into their office asking for a federal emergency to be declared. But the community was not served by being split 3 ways, because each one of those offices, they do a calculation and they say, well, how many of you live in my district? Oh, not that many. So let's move on. That's not always the case. And so what I'll say is that sometimes the community will come to you and they'll say, we've been talking amongst ourselves, right? And we do think that, having something that's east of this way and west of that way makes sense. And so you'll want to listen to that testimony. But I think in this instance, this was not because a community was asking to be split three ways. This was simply because somebody's house happened to be somewhere and that person chose a particular district, which then created this sort of cascading effect of a district splitting a community up as collateral damage, right? And that's really what we're trying to avoid. I know that you all will not be paying attention to where incumbents live, but in many ways, one of the things that we want to do is just be sure that if you have to make a division of a community, it's because the community says, you know, this would best serve us, and not because which again, I know that you're not going to be motivated by this, but not because of other reasons.
Commissioner Holtzman, then Co-Chair Williams.
Hi, Kathy. Because I've heard you give this presentation before, I Googled some of the news coverage of at the time of the Watts thing, the horrific fluke freak, you know, Watts area weather event. I did find that at least with the LA City representation, the area was represented very well by the Hahn family as city council member and mayor, and the mayor was able to put in a disaster relief request. But what I did not find, and I'm wondering if you could fill us in on, is the extent to which the splitting of Watts into the three different Senate and congressional districts was intentional. I mean, the area was kind of notorious for the riots and things, and I'm wondering if there was some fear of, I don't know, was it, how much is it, what evidence is there that it was an intentional split up Watts?
It is, well, here's what I'll say. Because when the legislature has in the past drawn the lines, they're doing it behind closed doors, and I haven't received the invitation to be in those closed door meetings. I don't know what the intentions are. I can only look at the effect, right? And so sometimes you have a situation where, depending on the level of government, a community is held whole at the city level, for instance, but then not held whole at the state and congressional level. And what the kind of division of, you know, sometimes it's because three incumbents happen to be living somewhat close to each other in the same neighborhood, and so they're giving a piece of the pizza pie to each one of them. Sometimes it is, you know, something entirely different. Like, I got horse stables somewhere, and I'm wanting to draw a line to go get, you know, an asset, or I want the ports, right? And so there's a dividing up of assets between legislators or politicians. I'm sorry, David, I'll try to research and find out why it was that Watts was split into three at multiple levels.
Yeah, and you know, LA, the city itself looks like a big gerrymander, especially because it wanted the port. So it has this big long stalk to get it. Thanks, Kathy.
Co-Chair Williams, then Commissioner Wong.
Okay, my question has, and I thank you, Kathy, for the presentation. I really appreciate it. It's very educational. When you were talking about these working class neighborhoods, and you were talking about a common culture and concerns, I'm wondering, does economics ever play into that? You know, poor communities, common concerns, and then when you're talking about districts for LA County, they're so large. So how does that play into our considerations?
Such a good question. So remember, you've got two different levels of thinking, and I just want to be sure that I sort of say that out loud. The Voting Rights Act, top tier consideration, you got to consider where there are minority voting populations that meet those three prongs that I think Professor Levitt would have laid out. And so it's a somewhat formulaic thing, right? That you're going to have to just pay attention to it. And then what you're going to think about is what districts, if put together, or what neighborhoods and cities, if put together, would best benefit from shared representation. That's ultimately what you're trying to do, right? So it's not that a single district has to be homogenous across the board, but it is the case that, like, if a district is split between many, many different kinds of interests that don't share some common thread, it makes it much more difficult for that supervisor to appropriately represent that group of people. So the other way to think about it is if you were creating a seat for a single human being, plus their many staff, right, to represent, you're trying to put communities and cities into some logical order that allows for that representative to do a good job, right? That's the other way of thinking about it.
Commissioner Wong?
Hello.
Hi, Kathy. Yes, this is very informative. This is great. But I was just wondering, because I know that, yes, we have to prioritize voting rights and minority rights. But when we're talking about communities of interest, I'm wondering if things, the concerns and those issues, like if voter cohesion, or if they happen to have, common voting patterns or something, if that would be a good indication that support to put those communities together, just evidence, right, of a community of interest.
No.
It's not, I know it's not required, but how difficult is it to get that kind of data? Do you know?
Well, past election data exists. And in fact, actually, the UC Berkeley statewide database has been holding on to past census data, but also past election data, and a lot of other data sources. They're a fantastic resource that the state Citizens Redistricting Commission uses, and they're a source of data for many levels of redistricting at the local level. So those exist. I'll also say that you have some resources within LA County that your governmental bodies may be collecting that are worth looking at. But I would start with the California UC Berkeley's statewide database that's run by Karen McDonald, partly because they're a state-funded entity, and that's what their job is. They wait every 10 years to kind of provide exactly this kind of data, and it's made to be used in the kind of mapping software that you all will be having access to. And what I'll say is that voting patterns do matter. And it's not that you're necessarily looking at like, oh, does everybody vote for a particular supervisor? Because obviously you have to think about this over time. And over time, over a whole decade, that supervisor may or may not be the same person, right? Populations change. What you're really thinking about is there a reason why communities that seem to share a lot of interests and seem to be voting in very similar ways are chopped up between different districts? And if that's the case, there may be reasons to sort of think about like using that unifying theme as yet another reason to pull them together. Now, I would hope that you're looking at multiple different layers, right? And so it's worth thinking about kind of voting patterns, but also impacts of testimony, that they're talking about, that where shared concerns could really be better represented by a single person. Great question, though, Dorina.
Thanks.
Commissioner Franklin.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. I was trying to wait until the end of your presentation, thinking that you might cover my question, but let me get it in anyway. I have two questions. One pertaining to unincorporated areas, which View Park is an unincorporated area, so is Watts and Willowbrook. When it comes to the census data, how does unincorporated areas count, or how should we look at unincorporated areas as it relates to joining the districts? And number two, concerning incarcerated individuals that are housed in LA County and also Department of Corrections. How do we count, or how can we find out where those individuals will be located after they're released, and then counting those in specific districts? How do we identify that?
Very good. Excellent questions. And I'm glad you asked them now rather than waiting. So the first question about unincorporated areas. The good news is that, let me start with this. I'm not sure if everybody has, or if anybody has explained this. see them actually, the map that we're looking at kind of gives you a fairly good sense where this area, right, and you can kind of tell where it is because you can see the port and you can see the freeway, but there's these blocks, right, these blocks that each have a different shading of color. And the very smallest unit, think of it as like a small Lego block, is a census block. And within that census block, right, then the census is basically counting all the people in that little area. And they're saying, okay, so how many people are in this census block? The way I heard a colleague, Fred McBride, describe it is, walk outside of your door, turn right, walk 2 blocks, turn right again, walk 2 blocks, turn right again. And eventually you get back to your house. You've now drawn like an imaginary 2 by 2 block square. And it's never exactly like that, but that's kind of what a census block is. Okay, and everybody who lives in that imaginary block that you just, that 2 block square that you drew, that would be the number of people in that census block. Now they're doing that throughout LA County and throughout the country. There's no areas that are left uncounted. So Commissioner Franklin, to your question, an unincorporated area would still be made up of a number of census blocks, and they're going to count how many people live there. And so you'll know who lives there. Now, you may be asking a slightly related question, which is, but where do we put them, right? They're not exactly LA City, or they're not exactly some other city. They belong to the county, but they don't belong to any particular city. And what I would say is that's where testimony and other data that you might be able to collect tells you a little bit, right? To say, this neighborhood shares a lot of similarities to this city that's right adjacent to it, or this other neighborhood that's right adjacent to it. And so if we thought about it, it makes sense that these two, would be together. I think a little bit, maybe as a good example would be El Sereno, that is just east of Alhambra. And you could think about, like, is El Sereno more similar to East Los Angeles, or is it more similar to Alhambra? And depending on kind of which way you go with that and the testimony that you receive, and other factors, you might say, okay, because of that, we're going to draw them in with X or Y. Not trying to bias you at all, just saying that might be an example of something. Now, your second question was about incarcerated individuals. And here's the good news. In California, we have passed an anti-prison gerrymandering law some time ago. And so what that means is that if somebody was incarcerated, that we would count them based on their last known address. So not in the prison per se, but in the place where in the community that they last came from, right? And so that same organization that I mentioned before, the UC Berkeley's statewide database, is charged with working with various state entities and county entities to reallocate people who are in prison for data purposes back to their last known address. And the reason for that, as I'm sure many of you are well versed in, is because it is those communities that they will eventually return to that will need to think about, how do we resource them, right? How do we represent them? How do we, if we want to integrate people back into society, we're not integrating them based on where they are in the prison. We're reintegrating them based on the communities that they are most likely to return to.
Great. Thank you for that. And this proves the significance and the importance of public engagement in the process, groups of interest, making it known, their voices of community of interest. So it's really important that the public get involved in what we're doing.
Thank you for saying that.
Commissioner Saira Soto.
Kathay, can you share with us, would you extend that same analysis to our unhoused population that over the many decades has largely been pushed into like the downtown LA area? So are they, I know they've been counted, but are they also being assigned to like an area that they may have come from?
They are not being reassigned. So that's a different population. And I'll say that that is something for us to wrap our heads around. I don't know that there's an easy answer, particularly because you'll remember the moment that we were starting to do the census counts right around April, May, June, July of last year. There were also significant city and county efforts to put people into some form of more stable housing, right? And in doing so, then how do we count them? Now, for many people, they may be counted at a place where they're identifying sort of so they can literally identify a park, a shelter, or in temporary housing. I think one of the biggest questions there is if there are people who come to you either from the community of advocates who work with people without homes or CBOs who come to you, and what they express is that the way to think about them is X, and in particular, the best way to serve them is to put them into a district that, you know, for whatever reason shares these kind of resources. That might be a very useful piece of testimony to tease out from people who are coming to you and telling you about these communities.
Thank you.
I believe there are no other questions or comments from commissioners.
I just want to say how inspired I am and excited at the level of detailed questions that each of you are asking, because it's exactly this kind of question that is going to lead you to hard conversations with each other, but also really thoughtful conversations about how to balance the needs of the different people that you're listening to. Now, we were somewhere in that slideshow, and I'm wondering if we can bring it back up. I'm so sorry. So we can go on to the next slide. And Gayla, I want to be conscious. How much more time do I have? We have a healthy amount of questions just now.
Yes, but I think the questions were very specific to LA County, which is very helpful. I'll
Fantastic.
defer to the co-chairs. We do have other business. I would suspect we have about 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to go really quickly through the rest of the presentation, and then if you want to carve out time for more questions, we can do that. All right. So all of those horribly drawn districts that we just looked at were drawn, I'm sad to say, by our California legislatures of the past. And so since then, in 2008 and 2010, California adopted laws, initiatives that created a California Citizens Redistricting Commission. And this was the first one that ever got seated in 2011. And as you can see, they are as amazingly diverse as you all are, and that's what makes me so proud of them. Next slide. One of the things that they did was to hold hearings around the state, and they really did a tremendous job of exceeding anybody's expectations. We thought on a good day that they might hold 15, 20. The legislature certainly never held more than a dozen, but they decided to hold over 100 public meetings in 32 cities over an 8-month period. And they received input from some 20,000 members of the public. This picture that you see is from Culver City. And not only is the room packed, but there are 3 separate rooms where people were watching in overflow rooms, because that's how popular it was. So it can be I think people can feel very engaged when they feel that there's an opportunity to be heard and they want to comment on the maps. I'm not necessarily saying that you need to do 100, but I will say that the numbers that are in the laws are just a minimum, and you can certainly aspire to doing more than those required minimums. Next slide. Since that time, many states have adopted redistricting reforms, including the creation of commissions in Colorado, in Ohio, in Michigan, right? Red states, blue states, purple states have, so it's not just California. And many other states at a local level have adopted some type of commission. So in Texas, Austin mimicked what California is doing and adopted a redistricting commission. So in a lot of ways, there's a community of people who are regular citizens, just like you, who've stepped forward to say, I want to be in charge of listening to people who live in my county, my city, my state, and I want to be sure that those district lines are drawn fairly. Next slide. LA County joins many different cities and counties across California to adopt exactly this kind of citizen redistricting commission. You all are the first. And so, again, not to put too much pressure on you, but I do feel very excited that you are knowledgeable. You're clearly, from your questions, asking really smart, deliberative questions. And that's exactly the kind of questions that you'll want to be asking throughout this process of your executive director, of people who are coming to testify to you, and of your fellow commissioners. Get to know each other really well. You all will come, hopefully, to respect each other not only as friends, sometimes with different opinions, but people who you trust and have confidence in to ask hard questions and have those hard conversations. Next slide. Want to talk about 3 driving principles that you should be thinking about. And at the very center of that is community input, right? Next layer out, thinking about creating transparent and inclusive processes. And then the third is equity, drawing equitable maps. It's okay. Next slide. Sorry. Okay. Oops. So first circle, the most important one, centering community input. You'll want to think about stories from Los Angeles communities. You'll want to spend some time explaining how to give input, and I understand that you may be scheduling some workshops around the county. That's a good thing. Give a little bit more time to that process to teach people about redistricting and to teach them about how they can give input. Just because you have a few nonprofits that are really active right now responding to you and writing you letters does not mean that most people know about redistricting. I guarantee you, you all know family members and community members, right? Who are like, what, you know, you want me to do what, you know, and even if they might be community leaders, getting them to a place where they're actually coming and telling you about, you know, where they are and what those communities look like, that's going to take a little bit of time. So it's okay to spend a little bit of time up front on the workshops that explain what redistricting is and how people can give input. I'm one of those crazy people that says the fact that the census data is not coming out until maybe August or September means you have a unique opportunity of time. No other commissions in previous decades, well, there haven't been that many commissions, but no other people in previous decades have had this luxury of time. And so in truth, give yourself that room and give communities the room to come to the table as partners. I will say, it looks like you already have something that's a site in process that's being built that will give people the opportunity to use the free mapping software. That's exciting. There are a number of different platforms, and so I'm sure that your executive director will help you kind of walk through what those could look like. But the reality is that the first step that we want to teach people is how to draw their communities, and then the next step is to think about districts. People are experts at their own communities, whether or not they know exactly what the district should look like. Okay, next slide. How can you create a transparent and inclusive process? So absolutely, I'm excited to see that you've got a website and a portal that can receive testimony. That's fantastic. Make sure that you also have the ability to receive district proposals for consideration and community map shapes, right? That may be through the free mapping software. Sometimes it's because people have gone and gotten a AAA map, or if they've held on to a Thomas guide and they've used a marker and they've drawn around it, right? Or they've printed out a page from Google Map and they've, again, used a highlighter to draw around it. So it can be very old school, but it tells you a lot because a group of people spent some time to think about where their communities were. I'm glad to see that you all are holding your meetings with your webinars turned on and your videos turned on, because redistricting is fundamentally a very visual process. And once you start to see the maps that people are proposing of their communities or of their districts, or you're showing different proposals and you're teasing out visualizations, that visual process is really important to have your cameras turned on. And then, of course, give people the time to comment on draft maps. Now, state law only requires that you have 2 hearings after the draft maps come out. But remember those rooms that were packed with 3 overflow rooms? That's after the draft maps came out. So remember that you do want to give much more than the minimum is required of public hearings to comment on the draft maps. Otherwise, you're going to have some people who are going to be yelling and screaming a lot. And it's better to hash it out in a meeting, in a longish meeting, than to sort of cut off that input because of some state minimums. Those are really just intended to be floors, not ceilings. I see that Commissioner Priya Sridharan has some questions.
I can
Priya.
wait. Hey, Kathy, how are you? Do you want me to wait? I can wait till you finish. It's a broader
I'm
question.
almost done. Yes. Okay, next slide. Okay, so lastly, so if you're taking all of that into account, you're listening to the community testimony, you're thinking about the different criteria, you're making sure that the process is inclusive. You're thinking about things like, how do we provide translations? How do we schedule meetings at times that people can come? But also, how do we make sure the pace is one that people are ready to come to the table? Not a rush, right? The last piece is thinking about how to build those equitable maps. What I will say is that each one of you has lived experience that is really, really important to informing this. That means both sort of the lived experience of things that you know and the honesty to say, you know what? I don't know that. I'm learning something new about a community that I had never thought about, right? Let me ask questions, right? That is the sort of honesty of saying, I've always lived in this place and I really love going to that place, but I had no idea there was that much diversity in, you know, X area. I certainly didn't know that the 710 caused that much controversy between this city and that city. No comment. So I will just say that I think that, like, in a lot of ways, that's the beauty of the input period. And that's why you want to build in time for people to come to the table and tell you those stories, but also time after the draft maps come out to reflect and tell you even more. Get to know your fellow commissioners. You're going to have some hard decisions. And the more that you can work on early projects together, the more that trust and the ability to listen to each other will take place. Let me just say this. This country has gone through some tough times where we have regularly been told that we are polarized and we can't possibly come together. Congress can't get together. You know, our citizens are sort of protesting against each other. You all are a model of this ability to come together despite your many different backgrounds and walks of life, to be able to draw those lines, right? And to listen to this diverse county. And that's what you're really trying to set the example for. Next slide. Okay, this is the basic timeline that we now know sort of exists. And let me just say, some of these dates may be up in the air. We know now that the apportionment data will be coming out by April 30th. And then from there on out, all the arrows are changing. So we thought, as of just a couple of weeks ago, or just a week ago, that the redistricting data was probably going to come out by September 30th. Now, there's a distinction between apportionment and redistricting. I know some of you know this, but some of you don't. Apportionment data is the data that is for each state what your total population is, so that we can decide how many members in the House of Representatives are assigned to that state. So California has 53, because we know our total state population is, at the time anyway, there's somewhere around 35 million. We're probably going to grow to 39 million. And the question is, how many congressional members will we get as a result of that? It's a big number for each state. Redistricting data that comes out later is within that 39 to 40 million people, where do people actually live? Down to, remember, the block level. And what are some of the characteristics that we know about them? Race and also age, okay? So that redistricting data we now understand because of an Ohio lawsuit that was just resolved, that the data may be coming out in a raw form as early as mid-August. And there are some entities like the California Statewide Database, California UC Berkeley Statewide Database, that will be taking the raw data and working to convert it into data that is useful and sort of assigned to the census blocks. That may be available, instead of having to wait until September to get the data and then processing it, you may have some data at that census block level sometime in September, ready to go, ready to use. Okay, so right now, the unadjusted timeline is that the supervisorial maps would be due December 15th, sorry, not 2022, December 15th, 2021. Right now, as we speak, the legislature and many, many stakeholders, county registrars are talking about the election dates. There are community groups that are talking about this, and they're talking about whether or not that deadline can be moved later, right? Because we know that the data is going to be coming out later than everybody expected. They're also talking about whether or not the candidate filing deadline and also the primary election that can be nudged, okay? Those may not be nudged as late as what you all might have been talking about in September, but they might be nudged a little bit, right? And just a little bit could make all the difference for you all. So while I would say that this decision is being made by the state legislature, they are consulting with stakeholders around the state. And I would gently suggest that it absolutely is the right of every redistricting commission and every body that is making a decision around redistricting to think about what would best serve community input. And if giving a little bit of time would help, conveying that to your state legislators is not a bad thing, or conveying it to your county registrar is not a bad thing. Next slide. Okay, next. Okay, so these are some of the time periods then, given this calendar, acknowledging that some of these dates may be pushed a little bit later, right, that you now have to deal with. You have at least 5 months to take public testimony around communities of interest. So this can be both the workshops that you're thinking about educating the community, but also your 7 hearings before you get to putting pencil to paper, right, or hand on the mouse drawing lines, right? So the good news is that you've got a period of time not only to do outreach, but also, you know, quite a bit of time to do the hearings. And again, it may be that because of that amount of time, you all say, you know, maybe we really ought to have a few more hearings. Not to make Executive Director Hartzov's job a lot harder, but, you know, if I think about the recent shootings that happened in Atlanta, and the outpouring of stories that came from the Asian American community. One of the things that strikes me is how many different pockets of Asian American communities there are, a community that I work in a lot, right? And even in where I live, which is in San Gabriel Valley, there were 2 separate protests, one in Alhambra, one in San Gabriel, and they were very, very different. One was made up of second generation, you know, very mixed race, talking deeply about sort of the history and the impact of anti-Asian violence. The other one was a very new immigrant population coming out and speaking passionately about what the impact was and how senior citizens were being hit hard. Now, those 2 communities might come together and say, yeah, actually, we're kind of similar. But they might also say, you know what? We need 2 separate sets of hearings to come and talk to you, because one is really thinking about it from a very new immigrant perspective, and the other is thinking about it from a second generation, third generation perspective. Those are 2 communities that are very close to each other and yet so different. And so what I would say is, I imagine that each one of you knows communities that you have worked with, lived in, or are somebody who's coming to you and sharing with you, where you say, you know what, we need to add 1 or 2 or a few more hearings, right? Because we need to hear from that diversity of voices. So I'm just giving you an example, not necessarily saying that you got to plan, you know, 2 in those 2 cities. Okay, so after that period, you've got 2.5 months approximately after the data is produced and ready to go, to then take your draft maps and refine them to a place where you've got equal population in the districts, because now you've got real census data that you can actually work with. And then if that deadline of December 15th is moved a little bit later, then you might have a few more months for that process to happen, which is a good thing, again, because you want to give enough time for people to comment on draft maps. And then you'll have a period of time where there's a court review and the county then takes the data and they process it. That's the basic timeline. Next slide. You may have seen these requirements already, so I won't go into them too much, but I will just say one more time, these are floors, not ceilings. So please, each one of you, take your lived experience and let that inform where you think hearings need to be held, how many hearings you need to have, and before and after you have those draft maps, how much input you need to take in. For sure, what I will say is that I was inspired by the state process where the state commissioner, Gil Ontai from San Diego, who is Pacific Islander in background, when he first started, he was like, we are going to have 1,000 hearings, and everybody was like, wow, you know. But, you know, setting his goals high, and then, you know, eventually, you know, they got down to a much more reasonable number, which was still an amazing number. But each time, you know, one of the reasons why was because he said, it isn't just about the number. Sometimes it's also giving people enough chances to say they feel heard, so that whatever the maps are that we end up adopting, people feel like they were included. And that process then allows them to feel ownership of the maps and so proud and affirming of the work, the hard work that you all will have put in. So many ways for you to reach out to different people. There are many CBOs that want to lean in and help. What I'll say is that those CBOs, again, are just a snapshot of the many different communities that you could reach out to. And so giving yourselves a little bit of time, even, you know, I understand there may be an outreach committee, fantastic. Spend that time to think about what the outreach might look like, and what each step of the way, how you can build a process that is truly inclusive. Next slide. Okay, now we are at the end. I just want to say one more time, so proud of you all. You are the drivers, right, of this amazing train. Make sure that the train is not a speeding one where nobody can get on board. Slow it down a little bit. Remember, grandma needs a little time to get up to the steps and get onto the train and get seated before you get going again. And so each step of the way, think about that lived experience of all the different communities that you all know, and help your executive director shape a plan that really makes sense based on what you know makes an inclusive process.
Commissioner Sridharan, you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, so I'll be really brief. And actually, Kathy touched on a lot of the points. You actually touched on the questions I wanted to ask, which was really just to get your professional take, your expertise on the timeline, just given where the log jams are. And so thank you for that. That was helpful. I just want to say, you know, Kathy and I go back. She hired me 20 years ago and taught me how to do the Redistricting 101 presentation. And as we did community-based mapping workshops throughout the state back when that was still kind of a novel thing. And I think, Kathy, you kind of underplayed the fact that in the past 20 years since, you've just been so active in this space. And I think truly, it's not an understatement to say you were one of the most catalytic forces in getting citizens commissions on the map, so to speak.
Thank you.
And not just that legacy, but also I think really creating a template for community-driven mapping. So thank you. Truly, I think we all owe you a debt of gratitude for that.
Thank you. Let me just hand the compliment back to everybody to say, each one of you, you're about to take that baton and represent a much larger community. And so this is a tremendous effort that you're going to be embarking on. And truthfully, it would not be possible if people like yourselves didn't step forward and offer yourselves up. And I say that because it's going to be a lot of work, and you are going to have difficult conversations. And I am so exceedingly thankful to each one of you for stepping forward to do that public service. So thank you.
Commissioner Holtzman, you have your hand up.
Hi. Kathy, I don't know how deep you've gotten into the weeds of our commission's particular statutory mandate, but we're supposed to respect, quote, the geographic integrity of any city, local neighborhood, or local community of interest in that order, and that's not alphabetical order. That's how it's listed in the statute, but it's all in one sentence. I wonder if you could do a statutory interpretation for us and say if that means we're supposed to prioritize cities over local neighborhoods and then consider local communities of interest.
The way I understand it is that there's actually different criteria. And your first criteria was equal population and respecting the US Constitution. So that is truly over everything else, right? And the next one is the Voting Rights Act. And that one is, other than equal population, truly prioritized over everything else. The way I interpret the listing of cities, neighborhoods, and communities of interest is that they are actually on the same plane. When we were drafting the state law, our thinking was to put them on the same plane in part because we knew that citizen commissioners were going to have to make judgments about which made sense. And maybe the best example, again, trying not to bias you all with the county example, so I'll use the statewide examples, was you think about sort of counties in places where it's more rural, right? And so those would be the geographic things that you're respecting. And you might have very few people, so you could put several counties into one district. And then in places where you have a lot of medium-sized cities, which LA County actually has, sort of east of downtown, there's a lot of medium-sized cities. South of downtown, there's a lot of medium-sized cities, right? And so there, those medium-sized cities can oftentimes be a building block, right? And you're going to think of them as like, well, if I can, I'm going to put several different cities into one different area. But you're going to have some medium to larger size cities where equal population is just not going to allow you to keep the whole city in a single district. And so again, your discretion to then think about neighborhoods and communities that might give you some natural ways to divide, right? So again, not going to use LA City. I'll describe this as like San Diego, for instance. So too big to put into a single supervisorial city district, So then you might think about like, okay, so are we talking about sort of using communities that are on the coast as one thing and inland as another? Are we thinking about a north-south thing? Is it sort of just corners that where there are areas where they feel a lot like their suburban counterparts, right? And so that kind of a conversation can be very important to be informed from the testimony that you're getting. So think of that line as all being on the same line where you have discretion based on what part of the county you're looking at to decide which one makes sense to prioritize. So it's not that cities must always be held whole before you ever go to something smaller. It is that depending on where you are and the size of the city and kind of what the testimony is that's coming back to you, you're going to make judgments. Because otherwise we could just do this with a machine, right? The whole point is let's have an interactive process where we are having human beings come and testify to other human beings, and you all are exercising your best judgment and conversation and dialogue to come up with a set of maps.
And I'm going to suggest with that we thank Kathay Feng for her spending her time with us and providing such a wonderful introduction to Redistricting 101. And it was certainly a wonderful companion piece with what we heard from Justin Levitt 2 weeks ago. So co-chairs, if you're comfortable, I think we should all give her a round of applause virtually. And thank you very much. You're welcome to linger, but I think should move on with our business if that's okay.
Thank you and goodbye. Good luck.
Appreciate your time so much.
Kathy, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we are then moving on to the next matter, which is, I guess, the ad hoc working groups presentations. And I guess my co-chair, Co-Chair Williams, is going to take the next one, I guess.
Yes, thank you, Co-Chair Maeda. Just want to say, as we talk about the updates, Co-Chair Maeda and myself are liaisons for some of the working groups. And so we'll be introducing the working groups for which we're liaisons. So I will introduce Commissioner Morales in the public outreach working group who will provide updates. But even before he gets started, I just want to commend Commissioner Morales and that group for all the hard work that they've been doing, pulling together the slide deck, the workshops, the public, all the schedules and more. So again, thank you for all the work that your working group is doing. So I'm handing it over to Commissioner Morales.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair Williams. And is there a public comment in this section here?
There is one. Ty, if you want to call on Alejandra.
Yes. Do we want to do public comments now? Typically we do after the introduction of the topic, but we can do it now as well. So Alejandra Ramirez, I'm sorry? Okay. So Alejandra Ramirez-Zarate from Advancement Project, California has a public comment for agenda item 6BI. So Alejandra, I will make you, I will allow you to talk and you'll be prompted by Zoom to unmute. When you do, please, you will have 2 minutes.
Hello, good evening, and thank you, commissioners, as always, for your dedication to LA County's redistricting. My name is Alejandra Ramirez-Zarate. It's great to see you all again. As a reminder, I'm with Advancement Project California, and I'm also a longtime San Fernando Valley resident, and as such, a constituent and beneficiary of your great work. And regarding this agenda item, we appreciate the intention of scheduling outreach workshops. And we'd also like to suggest an interactive method of engaging CBOs throughout the county. We do have questions about the format and process for these workshops, and this is why we are suggesting an interactive method. And there are dozens of community organizations, some that you've engaged with, many that you've not engaged with yet, particularly grassroots power building organizations preparing to activate and turn out their base. They've been preparing since last year, and they're ready to engage with you all and have their own insight to share. We believe a collaborative and interactive approach may be preferable in engaging the large CBO community throughout the county. And this means opportunities to ask questions and engage in dialogue. Additionally, the current slide deck is very comprehensive and lengthy. Thank you so much for those resources. However, given the planned duration of the workshop, as was advertised, 1 hour, we'd like to suggest that the commission cut down on a number of slides. The commission might look at the state CRC slide deck as a model for this introductory outreach workshops. And this can be accessed at wedrawthelineca.org/outreach_materials. Thank you so much for considering this. We look forward to engaging you during these workshops and during the hearing process generally. Thank you so much.
And we have another public comment for this agenda item. Kiana Asamafar from California Common Cause. Kiana, you will be prompted to unmute your mic. Once you begin speaking, you will have 2 minutes.
Hi, good evening, commissioners. Thank you so much for your time this evening. I just wanted to comment briefly on this, kind of along the lines of Alejandra's questions, and apologies, I actually missed the last commission meeting, but I had a clarifying question about the purpose of these workshops and whether they're mainly educational as kind of a way for the community to meet the commission, or whether these workshops are intended to gather input on the redistricting process. I did get the notification about the 2 meeting dates for April, and there were some details in there, but I think both for our organization and for members of the public, it would be helpful to know whether this is more educational or whether folks should prepare to provide some sort of feedback to the commission at these workshops. And separately, along the lines of Alejandra's point, I also have a question about the duration and the slide deck, and whether within that 1 hour workshop, whether all that content is able to be covered or not. So I'm hoping you all can answer some of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. There are currently no other public comment for this agenda item.
And I apologize that I did not get to the clock. So I apologize. So we are back to hello.
All righty, I think we're good in terms of the time. My internal clock tells me it was under 2 minutes. Yes, hopefully we we want to just update folks on where things are at with the ad hoc working group. And the first thing I want to say is we have been working on the slide deck, and this is a constant work in progress. And so in that, we have been putting as much focus and emphasis to make sure that we're putting pertinent information into the slide deck, to make sure that we are presenting the redistricting process to the community, to make sure that they are involved in the process and it's a welcoming space for them to do so. And then we also want to have part of it is to present this concept of working with other organizations in their outreach and input as well. And so again, this is in a collaborative spirit to be able to do that. And again, we're testing out the slide deck next Tuesday to see and time ourselves to actually practice it and see if we can actually do this, the 36 slides or so in about 40 minutes with 20 questions, 20 minutes left for questions. So we'll keep you updated in terms of that progress. And so the other thing I'll mention is that we have been actively working on a fact sheet as well to be able to provide some basic information on the redistricting for folks to understand the importance of that. And so, again, all these documents that we're developing is to put out and disseminate, get folks really interested in participating, or connecting to organizations or whatever the mechanism for folks to be able to provide that feedback. And so with that, the next upcoming workshops on April 6th and April 20th, the first being for community-based organizations and faith-based organizations. This is essentially just to present the concept and the ideas of the redistricting. And so what we want to make sure is that folks understand that this is just, getting used to what it is that we're trying to accomplish in our public outreach, is to let folks know where we're coming from and what our values are, exactly what it is that, how we were chosen. Those types of questions get answered, and also it doesn't come out from left field. There was actually some, intentionality and a little bit of randomness thrown in there in the terms of how we got into this very commission. And so with that, April 20th, would be the cities and government agencies and educational systems. And again, so we want to make sure we touch upon as many organizations and entities out there about the redistricting process. And so I just want to also mention that to answer the question about are we formally taking input and et cetera, there are questions that we anticipate that are going to come up that we may or may not have answers to. And so we want to make sure, we're taking some thoughts and consideration in terms of what's being said and what's being asked of us. But the formal process will be further down the line in these upcoming public hearings that are going to be taking place. And so we're having this, and I will get to it in a little bit, but the ability for folks to be able to participate in a more interactive kind of way beforehand, and then get into the formal, hearing process for input. But again, we want to underscore the idea that both of these, the forums, the hearings and the forums, they're equal weight in terms of the input that we're getting from the community. And so all this to say, it's giving us an extra opportunity to be able to hear from the community, to be able to make sure that we make those educated decisions as we move forward in the process. And so those are, forthcoming. We do have one of these sessions that's going to be in Spanish specifically, and the other is just kind of a general catch-all. We are encouraging folks. We're starting with Supervisorial District 1. We pushed back the time frame a little bit, just given that we have a little more flexibility. So Wednesday, May 19th is when we kick it off, no longer Cinco de Mayo. So, if you had plans, it's all right. There's another opportunity to catch up. So an hour and a half for the public forum and 7 p.m. for the public hearing. And so then we move on to the Supervisorial District 2, the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th. These are all landing on Wednesdays. And then we have our Spanish on Saturday, May 22nd, and a general one for Saturday, July 10th. And so, okay. Sorry, I'm getting a question. I'm not sure I understand. Commissioner Sara, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I wanted to, I guess, clarify or ask Alejandra if you can clarify, and maybe it was Anna who asked this question about whether these initial community organization and faith-based group meetings and city meetings, if these are a place for you to provide input on the outreach process, or are you talking about input on the mapping process? I think I'd like that clarification if possible.
And if I may to sort of add to clarification on this, we felt it was very important to have a dialogue with the community-based organizations, the faith-based cities, government agencies, and all of them, so they could help with the outreach. So when we hold the public forums, we hold the public hearings, they can help bring the people to the table and to also work with them going forward. So the whole purpose of these initial workshops is to really begin that conversation with all these groups that this commission is dependent upon to help get the word out and to engage the communities with the commission. I don't know, Commissioner Saida Soto, do you want the public commenting person to add clarification?
I think we've clarified that, yes, we're interested in orgs who are doing work on the ground to provide us feedback on our outreach efforts, and they've done that tonight, but I think these presentations will also give opportunity for that.
So now I would also like to add, there's an evaluation process after this. So again, we want to sharpen, all the input and get a clear sense of, are we hitting the mark and what we're putting out there to make sure that, we're increasing our effectiveness as we move forward. I see 3 questions now. I'm not sure who was first. 4 questions.
So in order, it's Commissioner Vento, Commissioner Holtzman, Commissioner Wong, and Commissioner Stetcher. And we also have one written question from the public in the Q&A.
Mr. Morales, thank you so much for all your hard work. I appreciate it. I just had a question about dates. I noticed something that you were having 2 districts on the same exact date. Am I correct on that? June 30th? District 4 and District 5 were going to meet at the same time. Is that correct?
I don't believe
that should be corrected. That's not intended.
Yeah, that's no.
Okay. So what is what are the correct dates? Just so
that would be.
It will be probably then the July 10th.
Yeah, July.
General one later into July.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, good catch.
So that would be a Saturday. July 10th, I think, is a Saturday. Am I right?
It would be whatever Wednesday would be falling.
But you don't meet.
Yeah. Let's see.
So instead of the 30th, it would be the 14th, July 14th.
July 14th.
Okay. Can I make a? I already have a pre-planned trip that week, and this is my district. I was wondering if maybe we can talk about this later on and figure something out. I want to be here, but I can't miss that July 14th date. And so I'm flexible, and if I have to, I have to, but I would just, if I could work something out with you guys later off when you meet, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, yeah, and so I think these are just sort of tentative dates, and we can go and do a survey of the full commission to get clarification. There's nothing sacred about the order of SD 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we probably then should also look at the July 10th meeting for the general makeup, because you don't want it so close to the July 14th.
Okay.
So.
Commissioner Wong, then Commissioner Stetcher.
Oh, okay. I thought the Commissioner Stetcher was first, but I did, after hearing Kathy's, recommendation about, that these are the minimum number of hearings, and after hearing the public comments, and we can discuss this more in our ad hoc outreach committee or working group, but I'm thinking about possibly adding additional hearings and even workshops. So I just like to start all of us thinking about that, because I do think, realizing that we only have an hour for these 2 workshops, I know that that's not going to be enough time. We are going to run out of time. And so I want to just respond to some of the public comments in that I do think that having more time and or having more hearings or opportunities to be interactive with the public will, be best in the long run for all of us. So that's just kind of my general comment.
Commissioner Stetcher.
Yes, could you clarify where it's appropriate for us to attend and where it's appropriate for us not to attend? Between the forums and the hearings in the various districts. We have Brown Act concerns, but
Yeah, I think there was another subsequent slide here to kind of go through a little bit of that in terms of how many folks can we have, for the public forum and public hearing. There's a difference, the more formalized structure, but we are encouraging folks, if it's your particular supervisorial district, that you participate in that specific one, because folks want to get to meet who you are, you represent them, so
when you say
consideration.
One, when you say that particular one, do you mean the hearing or the forum or the evening?
So ideally, both would be ideal. We do have to make sure that we have the numbers balanced out. We can't have more than a certain number of folks, because we have to meet that threshold to get to the actual hearing component. Whereas we're a little more flexible with the forum component before that.
And if I may, just to sort of explain the thinking behind this, the public hearings you have to do, and that's Brown Act. You're going to have people signing up, very formal comments. The idea of the public forums beforehand were to be more of a workshop format, because in the old days, you would have gone out to a community, you would have spread maps on the walls, you would have had people walking around talking among each other and talking about how their communities come together. So we wanted to create a more informal environment where it could be more of a dialogue and a discussion about the topics. The thinking was the public forum would occur ahead of time. Commissioners, up to, I believe it's 7 or 8 could be there, could hear the different comments. Then when we move into the formal public hearings, they could report out what they heard. And then people would have the formal process of making their public comments. But it was to provide this opportunity for more dialogue and discussion. So the public forum first, little break, and then go into the public hearing, which would be the very structured Brown Act component, and would require a forum.
Commissioner Holtzman, then co-chair Maeda.
So the slide on the screen is a little confusing because the bluish box on the left says about public hearings, but the last 2 bullet points use the word workshop. I think that should be hearing. And the other thing I want to say is, since the hearings are required by law for the commission to do, I think all commissioners should be encouraged to attend each of the hearings. I don't think I think everybody should do it if they can, and because they're so important. If you can't, if you miss it, I think each commissioner should watch the tape of a hearing they miss. So there you go.
Co-chair Maeda, then Commissioner Orpanella Segura.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that with what Commissioner Holtzman said, and to make sure I understand the actual answers to Commissioner Stetcher's question, which is how many, which ones are we encouraged to be at, which ones can we be at, et cetera. So just so I understand, the workshops, the 2 workshops we're talking about, that one we cannot have more than 7 commissioners attending. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then there is, thank you, Holly. So, and then there is already, as the slide shows, certain folks, mostly from the public outreach working group, who are slotted in. And so there may be, maybe a slot or 2 in addition to those folks who can participate in those. Public hearings, as Commissioner Holtzman indicated, all of us should attend if possible, and we clearly need at least 9 in order for it to be a valid public hearing. So you should all slot those in, and those are mostly scheduled for our regular meeting dates anyways. So you should have those generally free. What about the public forums that precede the public hearings? Will those violate the Brown Act if we have more than 7 commissioners attend those, or are we also all encouraged to attend those?
Public forums, the idea was to have up to 7.
Okay. So we'll have to sort of try to coordinate ahead of time.
Structured public hearings, and we might as well just hold a public hearing.
Okay, we'll have to then coordinate ahead of time who is slotted to attend, etc. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Orpanela-Segura.
Not sure if this is appropriate for ad hoc, but I'm wondering if there's a possibility of doing some sort of learning, virtual learning opportunity via like a Facebook Live with maybe one of the co-chairs or a commissioner and either the county or a partner organization that would serve as, something informal to educate the public about what redistricting is. I don't know if there are guidelines with like Brown Act violations, but I'm wondering if we can explore that. And again, we could have a discussion during our ad hoc, but I just wanted to put that on the table.
Well, and also I believe the law is pretty clear that when we hold the public hearings, the first part of it is that education, that you will have a mini presentation there as well. But let's explore that other idea as well, Commissioner Orpanela-Segura, when we meet.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. All hands out. All right. I think we have a couple more slides to go here, but we're almost there. So just back one. Yes. So this is kind of what we were talking about. Just mentioned just briefly earlier. But Commissioner Williams, do you want to, give us a sense of what's happening in this event and how we're playing a role in it as well?
Okay. Yeah. I was invited by Lena Kennedy to speak to Women in Leadership Vital Voices. One of the things that Lena Kennedy is the founder of this group, and I've also invited Commissioner Franklin to join me on this, and it's coming up this Friday. But in addition to that, Lena has pulled in some community partners that you'll see to be present at this. But the intent is to use most of the slide deck and its information and to be able to inform folks about that. Our audience is, we're expecting anywhere between 75 and 100 people. I don't know, Lena's working that really hard, but it's the first time out and looking forward to seeing what kind of feedback we got. And I know, I heard they had a preliminary meeting and had lots of discussions on this. So it should be a really motivated crowd, I would say, to hear what's happening around redistricting.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair Williams. So as you can see, folks are going to be reaching out to us in different capacities. And, we have to work with community organizations to be able to see where those opportunities make sense and where we can actually work together to get more folks interested in this process and have that community input come in at the end of the day. But thank you for the suggestions from the commissioners, and we'll take it back to the working group. We're meeting next Tuesday, and we'll take all that into consideration. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Commissioner Morales. A lot of work going on. And again, thank you for all that you and your group has done. Now we want to switch to the mapping and demography work group. And we started the discussion at the last meeting. Commissioner Shahrihan will be presenting, and we'll also have Commissioner Stechter make a presentation, but we're hoping to approve the RFP as part of this conversation. So I'm gonna hand it off to Commissioner Shahrihan. And again, thank you for all of the really hard work your group has done, and just moving this process forward, the RFP, and the support of Holly and Gayla as well. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Co-Chair Williams. I see that there's a public comment on this item, 6B2. Do we want to take that comment first?
Can we do, I was going to suggest that we would, well, the format we had been doing is having clarifying questions from the commissioners and then any public comments. However, the last one, comment was sort of informative, but I'd like to, if we can, follow that process.
Okay, great. We've been kind of tooling around with the RFPs. As you know, we first presented the RFP on at the March 5th meeting, and that's what's before you now. We took back any feedback that we got and revised the RFP. One of the important changes that we made, though, was that in the original that we first looked at on March 5th, we included as part of the demography work a voter polarization analysis or consulting services specifically for that. And we made the decision that it made sense to actually separate this out as a separate RFP, in part because the voter polarization analysis seems related but distinct from a lot of the mapping work. And also, I think the main reason to separate it out is just, especially after Justin Levitt's presentation in our last meeting, realizing just how central this is, how important it is, and particularly how valuable it would be to get it done on the early side. So we're moving it out to kind of emphasize its importance as well as hopefully streamline it. You know, the engagement on the voter polarization analysis piece is a shorter one. So I think we in our working group walked away with the sense that it's really important to have this analysis at the front end of any contemplation of what the maps might look like. So it's the same essential content that was contemplated in a single RFP, now in two. And we did, I think as Co-Chair Williams said, the ideal would be to be able to approve these today. We would ideally like them to go out as soon as possible, out into the wild so people can start proposing, and ideally at the same time, because to some extent, because the work is interrelated and we may have some proposers who are interested in both. So being able to see the two and think about how they want to approach their proposal might be helpful. That said, we did not change the heart of the voter polarization analysis piece, but we did spell it out in greater detail. So if there's more discussion and feedback and we need to take it back for a second round of revision, we can bring it back to the next meeting. So that's the nutshell of the RFPs. I think I'll turn it over to Commissioner Stetcher to walk us through what we think is, what we're proposing as the selection process beyond receiving responses to the RFP.
Great. Thank you very much, Priya. What we are proposing to do in terms of reviewing these RFPs is to have the working group take the first pass at reducing the number and bringing forward to the full commission the strongest proposals that we receive. So what we are proposing to do is have the working group members all read each submission. It could be anywhere between 1 and half a dozen, 8 or 10, and rate them using a point system that's specified in the RFP itself, so everybody knows what the criteria are in which they're being rated. And then Priya would bring forward to the commission those proposals that are the strongest, that the working group decides are the strongest. And we would invite each of the proposers to make a presentation and answer questions from the full commission. So we would ask them to summarize the key elements of their proposal in 5 or 10 minutes, submit the proposal, of course, so that everyone can read it ahead of time. We would come up with a set of common questions that each proposer would have to answer, and some specific questions based on elements in the proposal that are unique or that are less clear. And as a group, we'd ask those questions. All of the groups all the proposers that successfully made the cut to be invited would make their presentations the same evening. We would then assign points based on a different scale that has not yet been developed, but it relates to the key elements of those proposals. and the commissioner as a whole would then pick the winning bidder, and we begin negotiations. We'd award the contract and then begin negotiations on the specific legal issues.
Okay, are there any questions? Or
Priya, did you want to go through this slide or did you want to wait on this one?
I'll just quickly touch on this slide. So this just sort of shows you what the timeline would be for reviewing proposals, interviewing proposers, and ultimately starting the engagement. For the demographer RFP, the voter polarization analysis RFP, and then the proposed timeline if we can approve both today. And as you can see, obviously, if it takes longer to approve the voter polarization analysis, it's going to take longer to start that engagement.
We have two questions from commissioners. We have Commissioner Vento, then Commissioner Mendoza.
Thank you, commissioners, for all your work on this. I think this is awesome. I just wanted to share with you, I think that this voter analysis thing is really important. And I think that we have, obviously the process that we go through, it will be very helpful for us to define it. And I think that this particular analysis is really it might have a huge influence on us. So I think it's really important to really look at this. And I'm happy to help out if you guys need help. I'm just throwing my hat in the ring. I know sometimes we volunteer and we regret it, but this analysis aspect is kind of an interest in my area. That's why I just want to share that with you. So I'm not trying to step on anybody's feet or anything like this, but if you do need help or something like this, I'm willing to step up and help you out in that area. So thank you.
And excuse me, Clerk Tylee, but I think we had a public comment before we took the commissioner discussion.
Apologies.
Just
we have a public comment from Giovanni Hernandez from Naleo Educational Fund. Giovanni Hernandez, you'll be prompted by Zoom to unmute. Once you begin speaking, you will have 2 minutes to make your public comment.
Hi, good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Good evening, members of the Los Angeles County Citizens Redistricting Commission. My name is Giovanni Hernandez, and I am the California Redistricting Program Manager with the Naleo National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials Naleo Educational Fund. First off, I just want to take this opportunity to congratulate you all on your selection to this commission and to thank you all for your service and commitment to a fair redistricting process for all Angelenos. Secondly, I want to recognize and thank you again for your work and thoughtfulness on the RFP and statement of work for demographers. We would like to be good partners and be able to provide you with substantive and constructive feedback on this RFP. Our input, along with that of our partners and members of the community, would be better informed and helpful if we had more time to dive deep into the most recently released draft of this RFP that was released on Friday. We understand and acknowledge the time constraint, but kindly ask for your consideration to not vote to approve this RFP tonight, but instead until the next commission meeting. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. There are currently no other, apologies. There's one more public comment for this item. Kiana Asamanfar from California Common Cause. Kiana, Zoom will prompt you to unmute your mic. Once you begin speaking, you will have 2 minutes to make your public comment.
Thank you. First, let me say thank you so much to the ad hoc working group for putting so much time and thoughtfulness into these draft RFPs. I also do very much appreciate the commission's approach of inviting public input on both of these drafts before they're finalized. To Commissioner Vento's point, I just wanted to emphasize how these two hires really are going to play a huge role in shaping the commission's work, not only in the way that it engages with the public, but of course with the final product and the final maps that have huge implications on our county's future for the next decade. and I will say, because the drafts were posted Friday evening, our organization has not had a chance to take a look in depth at the most current versions. And I do know that some of our partner organizations also were interested in taking a look and providing feedback. So we are hoping for more time to review and are happy to provide our feedback in a format that's most helpful for the working group, whether that's through a meeting or through a letter. We don't want to slow down this process, but we do want to contribute and share our input before it is finalized. Thank you so much for your consideration.
There are currently no other public comment on this item.
Okay. Are we open for discussion?
We have Commissioner Mendoza, then Co-Chair Maeda.
Thank you. Yes, I had my hand up before the public comment, so I'm not necessarily responding to them, I assure you. But I was going to ask if the working group is asking for authorization or approval to move forward. I wanted to say that I think that's a good idea and that we should do this to keep it moving. If there needs to be a modification and maybe a little bit more time and emphasis on little to receive some sort of comment or ability for one or more groups to take a further look at this, fine. But I think we really need to keep things moving, and that's it.
Co-Chair Maeda.
Thank you. I just want to make sure everyone understands, the public as well, that the RFP draft was available a month ago. Before the last meeting, we had a conversation about it as well. It's been available in terms of the mapping RFP. The guts of that have been available for weeks now. Many of the commissioners have provided input. What has changed was that one part of that task, the voter polarization analysis task, was stripped out. But otherwise, the demographer and mapping RFP have been in place. And so, if there was input that we've been taking input from the public as well as the commission for a few weeks now. So I think we should be prepared to vote at least on that. The other thing I just want a clarification. So the way it's set up, the way the working group plans this is to have the ability of one contractor, one proposed contractor, to bid on either or both of these RFPs. Is that right? And if that's right, then I don't think there's any any disadvantage, or it basically someone could decide that they are qualified for both and apply to both, just as it was previously set up. They could apply to one RFP and do both tasks, or if they decide they would only prefer to bid on one of those tasks, they could do that. So I think this is an appropriate time for us to vote, at least on the demographer and mapping RFP.
Commissioner Holtzman.
Hi, thank you. I would like to propose this one change to the mapping demography RFP. If I could share my screen, I could show that change. There we go. All right. Okay, so there it is in blue. Remember how Kathay Feng just told us that environmental health in the Long Beach case was an important component of communities of interest? Well, the main reason I joined the ad hoc working group that developed this RFP really was to make sure that environmental indicators could be imported into the data sets that we use, into the mapping, our redistricting database mapping. I had proposed this and got talked out of it at a ad hoc committee meeting. But then I realized that I really want to make the whoever we hire, make our consultants here was just aware that we may very well want to import what I call environmental indicators, environmental health indicators. There's a great database from the office where I used to work, the State Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, called the Cal Enviro Screen, that actually does have scores for health impacts at the census level, block or tract, I forget which. And then, so anyway, I came to the work group hoping to have something about importing environmental indicators, us being able to use them in our mapping. And then as I was reading on, because I'm a League of Women Voters person and I'm interested in political ethics, I realized that the last time's Los Angeles City redistricting was actually deliberately done partly to give good political donation turf and high real estate value to one particular politician who got in trouble, probably partly because of this. So we may want to also look at, fairly distributing such things amongst districts. So, to be brief, I would like to just add after the word additional, additional data, comma, such as environmental indicators, and then go on to say real estate values and political donation amounts. Just not that they've necessarily done it, but that they can say that they're able to do it. So that's that.
Commissioner Shida, then Commissioner Wong.
So I am hesitant to get into lists of specific things that data sets that interest us, because I think that list could be infinite. If we all wrote down 3 things that matter to us, or 3 things that we think would be important to look at, this list will just go on forever. So I think it's better to keep it general. I do think we can incorporate, examples in the questions that we ask in the oral interviews. But I think putting these 3 things in is giving primacy to 3 things that one person thinks is important. Someone else might think another 3 things are important. I'm completely confused about political donation amounts, to be honest. But at any rate, I understand the general the general motivating spirit behind it. But I just think this takes us down a rabbit hole we don't really have necessarily a need for. I think this is covered by the general bullet point that's already there.
Commissioner Wong?
Yes, I guess, well, I would just, I guess I would just add or reiterate Commissioner Sherdrawn's noting that my understanding that we could include any indicators and we didn't have to list them out, because there's other indicators like socioeconomic indicators that I would include, but I didn't want to get into a listing of all of them. And yeah, I am also afraid, because if you just list 3, then then we are definitely excluding other indicators that many of us think should be included. So I would be, we could just put in a general kind of phrase that says, and any additional indicators that we feel are pertinent or relevant to, the mapping. Some general one, because it was actually my understanding that we were going to consider those kinds of things anyway. But if it needs to be clarified, I'd be happy to make a general kind of inclusion like that.
Are there any other comments for discussion? Is there a motion?
I motion.
I second the motion for the originally prepared by the working group proposal to move this forward.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
Is the motion to keep the language as is without the addition by Commissioner Holtzman? Wanted to confirm.
That's what I was seconding.
Okay.
And it was moved by John Vento, Commissioner Vento. Okay, so the motion is to approve both RFPs with the original language, moved by Commissioner Vento and seconded by Commissioner Mendoza.
No, I think there's some clarification on that one.
Okay.
Commissioner Stetzer, can you help me with my memory? I think what it is.
I think the motion is to approve the RFP for the demographer with the original language.
Okay.
Not the RFP for the analysis of racially polarized voting at this point.
Okay.
Okay, I'm confused on this. I thought we were doing both at the same time. That's what I was under the impression. So maybe I need some clarification.
And that's what I was seconding, approval of both.
Because I was under the impression that we needed to get this going forward. So that's what I was thinking. I thought it was to do both. That's my what I was understanding through the conversation.
Okay. So the motion is to move it forward with the original language for the demographer, but to move it forward for approval of both RFPs. And seconded by, proposed by John Vento and seconded by Mark Mendoza. Did I get that right? Okay. All right.
We also have two hands up from other commissioners making comments or questions. We have Commissioner Holtzman and Commissioner Sider-Soto.
All right, so on the motion, first of all, I do think we should split the two. I'll vote against the motion just because it includes the Voter Polarization Act RFP. I think that's a little bit too new to approve tonight. And this, the slide that we saw earlier suggested that we might not be issuing it until 2 weeks after we issue the microphone. I also just wanted to say that, I didn't intend the list of types of data to be, that I wanted to add to be exclusive. That's why I put, such as in my suggested language. And now that Commissioner Sridharan, the ad hoc chair, has suggested that we could include questions about specific types of data, or at least mention that when we ask questions of the candidates. I'm perfectly satisfied with voting to approve the RFP for the demographer, which are worked extensively on. There was a lot of back and forth on this. Just on email just before this meeting. I'm sorry I was out. I didn't really get to see that, but I'm very pleased with the work my fellow commissioners did on the ad hoc group on the RFP for demography. So I'll have to vote no on the motion as it stands, but would vote yes on the just the demography RFP tonight.
Okay. Any other comments?
We have Commissioner Sider-Soto and Commissioner Vento.
Yeah, just wondering, Commissioner Mendoza, did I hear you suggest that perhaps we move forward with a vote, but maybe unconventionally allow for any partner that may have some questions or concerns to communicate them to the ad hoc group?
I did say basically that until hearing Co-Chair Maeda talk about how long the document has been available. It sounds to me like there's been ample time for groups to participate if they so choose to. So I said I think I emphasize a little bit more time, but I don't know if the schedule permits that. So I guess I would look to the working group to speak to that and see if there's the ability to do that and keep things moving.
So I guess the other question is, given sort of, the presentation today by Kathay and sort of this, this notion that we actually have more time, not a ton more time, but more time. Is there flexibility, even, 2 weeks flexibility in that schedule? I think in the spirit of collaboration.
Right. Right. So are you asking, well, so I think I don't think the timeline is all that different based on what Kathay Feng shared versus what we knew before. It may be a little different on the back end, but that's an optimistic view at this point. I think that there is a real value to having a demographer on board in June when we're sort of seriously starting public hearings in earnest for them to hear the input that will shape our direction. With respect to I think that the content of the RFP is collectively that is relatively new is that we fleshed out the description on the racially polarized voting analysis piece. So, if we want to separate that piece out to allow, that was in the original RFP that we would be talking about that. We did not receive any input from anybody, though we certainly solicited it, right? We didn't receive any input from the public on what that piece should look like. We then drafted it in more detail, put that out on Friday. It's now Wednesday night. But people have only had since Friday to react to our media draft, right? So if we need to kind of separate that one out to allow more time for input, but the substance of the demographer RFP really has not changed. The substance of it hasn't changed. We've wordsmithed, we've tinkered, we've tightened a couple of details to make them more clear. We finalized the scoring and the selection process, but the substance of what we're seeking in the RFP hasn't really changed and has been on view for a month. So I hesitate to slow that one down. We already feel like we're a little pressed on time, in part because we need that person on board, working with the data, starting to work with the data sets to be able to advise us. The other thing I think is a challenge is we are running into questions now increasingly that we really need our experts on board to help us with, right? So for example, I think we really do need to start, not today, not necessarily in the next couple of meetings, but in the near future, we need to start having, really thinking about how we are going to take an extraordinary amount of layered and complex data and funnel that into a commission, a 14-member commission giving direction to a demographer to draw a map, right? What is that process going to be? And I think we need the demographer to help us talk through that. So I hesitate to slow the demographer RFP down. I do think, it wouldn't hurt to have a little more, to give more time for input on the piece that is new, which is really the more descriptive voter polarization analysis RFP.
Thank you, Commissioner Sridharan, for walking through that with us. I appreciate it.
We have Commissioner Bentel, then Co-Chair Maeda, then Commissioner Stetcher.
Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to share with you one point. I'm totally on board with getting the demographer. I think that's something that we really need to know. And if you want to separate motions, I'm fine with that. I do want to just share with this. There's only like 2 or 3 people in the county of Los Angeles that can actually do this type of analysis. I'm just letting you know this. This is not something we're going to have 55 or 60 or 100 people. Right. There are like 2 people that I know of, and I'm just saying that. And yeah, definitely. And it's not like we're having a lot of choices here. And
I think, I'm sorry.
Go for it. No, go please.
No, simply I want to, I want to just say, I think that's true. It's a handful of people in the world, right, in the country that can do this work. And the other challenge that we're seeing, and Commissioner Holtzman is the person who's keeping most track of what other commissions are doing. We have this little bit of anxiety that the people who will be good for us are going to get snapped up and too busy if we don't get moving. So that's a concern, right? I think, people are getting signed up at the bevy of citizens commissions that Kathay showed us on the map. They're all sucking up the demographers. So it is a little, and I think the other thing is there's a universe of people who know demography and redistricting and mapping, but our conflict of interest rules rule out a big chunk of them because a lot of the people doing this work have done the type of political work that makes them not eligible to be our demographer, right? So the universe of people we have the opportunity to attract is really small. So that's like the other kind of time pressure that I think we feel.
Right, and I just wanted to add to you, I think it is important for us to really consider people that are within our own county to do this racial voting analysis. Everybody, that is something to consider. And as far as I know, there's only 2 that I know of that actually have credentials that have actually done the study. So it's not like we would be sifting through 50 or 60 applications.
Okay, we have Co-Chair Maeda, then Commissioner Stetcher.
Thank you. Commissioner Sridharan clarified the point as far as how long the public has had this information. I didn't want to misstate the point, Commissioner Mendoza. I wasn't saying that there was an RFP for the racial polarization one weeks ago. That is new. That is true. All I was saying was that that was part of the wrapped up into the other RFP. Nevertheless, in light of that, there seems to be a consensus that we should be voting on the RFP for the mapping one. I think I would suggest we go forward and vote on that. And if we have to hold the other one, it'd be unfortunate, but I understand that some people would feel like they would want more time for that one.
Commissioner Stetcher?
Yeah, just another reason to approve the RFP for the demographer is that it's a more complicated process. Responding to it and writing the proposal is going to be a little more complicated than the racially polarized voting analysis, and people will need time. So we have to give responders, prospective responders, 3 weeks to respond to this. So I think it's essential we go forward with that tonight.
Okay. Any other comments? So we have a motion. Is there modification to the motion? Because we have a motion on the floor to approve both. That has been approved in second. I also heard a comment about perhaps looking at approving the RFP for the demographer.
So do we need an amending motion to amend the motion to vote only on the demographer RFP? Okay, I move that we vote only on the demographer RFP.
I second that.
Okay, so we have an amended motion on the floor to vote on the demographer RFP, and it's been approved. Motion made by Commissioner Sirhan and second by Stetcher, Commissioner Stetcher. So any question, comment? Okay.
Call the question.
Okay, can we do roll call, please?
So I will now take roll call. Commissioners, please be prepared to unmute your mic and respond when your name is called. Commissioner Priscilla Orpanella Segura.
Yes.
Commissioner Hyla Soto.
Yes.
Commissioner Saida Soto.
Yes.
Commissioner Priya Shidaran.
Yes.
Commissioner Brian Stetcher.
Yes.
Commissioner John Vento. Co-Chair Carolyn Williams.
Yes.
Commissioner Dorina Wong.
Yes.
Commissioner Jean Franklin.
Yes.
Commissioner David Holtzman.
Yes.
Co-Chair Daniel Maeda.
Yes.
Commissioner Mark Mendoza.
Aye.
Commissioner Apolonio Morales.
Yes.
And Commissioner Nelson Obregon.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And are we looking to bring the other one back for consideration at the next meeting? Next commission meeting?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Are there anything else from your working group?
I think that covers our item. Thank you.
Can I make a request? Thank you. Of the public, people who want to comment on the RFP that's still out there to do the racially polarized voting analysis, we want to vote on it next week, and so it's too late to get comments in 2 weeks' time on Wednesday night. We'd like to get any feedback in a form that's easy for us to use, a written form, within a week's time, if possible.
And let me just also mention, I have put my email out there to all of these groups. Please feel free to send any information, feedback. We have been asking for the last 2 months for any suggestions of experts out there who might be candidates to bid, to please let us know of some of these individuals. So far, I've not gotten any responses from anyone from the public, and we would really like to get that kind of feedback. So if you know of anyone, please let us know. We really want the best and the brightest for this commission to tackle these big problems for LA County.
And just to note, I think our next meeting is actually in 3 weeks. So Our demography working group is not meeting tomorrow, but we will be meeting next week. We will try to get a draft, a revised draft of the voter polarization analysis RFP out, but it would be great to get any input or feedback on that that can be sent directly to Gayla so that we can incorporate that input before the next draft. Thank you.
Great. I think we're now moving to 6, well, the 3 small I's, I guess, the lead of the working group for legislation and updates and other CRCs, Commissioner Holtzman. You're up.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Maeda, Co-Chair Maeda. For my working group's report, I got just a few things to go through real quickly, sort of to read at your own leisure. In the past day, I had posted an update on some of the other independent redistricting commissions. Please have a look at that when you can, kind of like homework. Also, as homework, there was a suggestion in a presentation made to the Santa Barbara Commission by Steve Lynn, who was chair of the 2001 Arizona Independent Commission, that perhaps commissioners ought to make an agreement to not draw maps of our own. And the main reason he said for that was so that commissioners don't get too attached to one map because they created it. And there's a short, I excerpted the video from the meeting. There's a short 56-second video posted with the supporting materials for this agenda item tonight now. And I encourage you all to watch that. The idea is that one could, we could adjust maps that are submitted by the public, especially to conform with principles that we may have decided upon. But just this is something to think about for a future meeting. The main thrust of today's meeting is going to be a discussion on what to do about the problem of the census data being late. And I did, in time for public notice, send out a virtual handout with some ideas that are in the hopper now. And perhaps we should take public comment on that now to start, unless anybody has a clarifying question. And then we can move on to the discussion. I have a little update that Kathy alluded to include as well, but I think maybe we should get public comment on what I noticed. Any public comment?
There are currently no public comment for this particular item.
Okay, good. So we'll just move right along. All right, so I'm going to share my screen because, it might be helpful. Let's see now if I can find the. Okay, so here's just something to consider first. This came to me today. David Bain, the chair of the San Diego Commission, said they want to be in touch and collaborate, but also wanted us to be aware of this recent press release from the Census Bureau. And it's something that Kathay Feng alluded to, that a legacy format summary redistricting data file may be available to everybody in mid to late August 2021. And Kathay suggested that the UC Berkeley database, people might be able to process this and make it usable. So, we may be able to get some usable data earlier. I wanted to flag that for people, and we can post this. So let's see. I want to now find my. Okay, hang on. Okay, now I'm looking at my my Acrobat. I think you're looking at my Acrobat too, but I want to. There it is. Get that one up, and that's the handout that I sent out earlier. Can you all see that? How to address this delayed census problem? Okay, so you've had time to read the existing ideas that are already in the hopper. That's not like a formal legislative hopper. That's just in the basket of things that we're considering and we're processing now. And then this came in from Gayla earlier in the week, who was suggesting some specifics, reducing the timeline for posting map options from 7 to 5 days, and be more specific about reducing the 30 days to a specific number, 10 days, and perhaps request that the state cut in half the time it'll take for them to adjust the data for prison population. As again, we learned from Kathay today that has to be done. So I just intend this to kick off a discussion. If any commissioners now, because I couldn't collect them all from you individually because of the Brown Act, want to throw in some other ideas into the hopper. If there's any of these ideas that the commission would like to adopt, if any commissioners would like to adopt, we could adopt them today, and then I could reach out to other commissions, say, we support this, might you support this too? So there we are. Commissioners, discussion, please. Very quiet.
We have a hand from Commissioner Stetcher, then Co-Chair Maeda.
Kathay suggested getting in touch with our representatives, and I think that's certainly an option. And perhaps a more powerful one is doing this jointly with some of the other commissions. We've made initial contacts, or we're monitoring what they're doing. Do you think there are particular allies who would be the most powerful ones to get on board with us approaching our elected representatives about modifying these dates?
Well, at some point we have to come up with an idea that we support, and then we could shop that around to potential allies. There are other allies who are concerned with this, but so far I haven't heard any concrete proposals, and the bill that would carry these proposals to the legislature doesn't have anything concrete in it still. So it's a sort of chicken and egg problem, and I do favor at least supporting 1 or 2 or 3 of these ideas so that we can see if others would join us. And it doesn't just have to be other commissions. It could be some of the community-based organizations we're coordinating with. So Chair Maeda?
So I agree that there are potential other allies. Certainly the organizations that were instrumental in getting the date pushed to December 15th is our natural allies once there is some sort of proposal. But it does seem to me that there's a number of different little ways to get a little bit of additional time that we ought to put together in a proposal, because we may not get everything, but we might as well just ask for a lot of different things that are reasonable. And I think the idea of saying public hearings must be, at least, 10 days apart, 30 days, let's see, it must be, what is it now, that 2 public hearings must be at least 30 days apart? So we can change that to at least 10 days apart. That gives us a little bit more flexibility in terms of time. I think the idea of the state giving us the data on the prison population, they don't necessarily need all that much time. They can start working on that thing now and get us the data earlier. We should be able to get that data earlier. So we should put together some of these kinds of things, as well as have conversations with some of these other allies. With regards to trying to enlist other CRCs or other independent commissions, that we're going to have to work with Holly on that. There's maybe some Brown Act issues about that, but we should come up with something. My suggestion is come up with a few different things that we think would be helpful to us, and start trying to find folks to ally with us in pushing those forward.
If I could just jump in here and call out that the group that is the most affected by the current deadline in the law is counties. Cities, because of the way their elections are structured, most cities, their deadline is not until April for most, not all cities. And of course, we would think that was luxury to have until April, to file the map. So as you're looking to identify, it of course can be the redistricting commissions for counties, but it can also be counties that don't have redistricting commissions, but it's still the county itself that is looking at the same compressed time schedule. Those are the jurisdictions that share our deadlines.
Commissioner Franklin, then Commissioner Mendoza.
Yes, thank you. I just want a little bit more clarifications, ideas that are in the hopper, particularly front-loading allocations into population database of incarcerated people. The date, April 1st, why is that indicated there?
So that's the census date. That's technically the date that the census has to report population for.
Okay.
That passed. That was last year's at April 1st.
Okay, all right. So I would like to really have that data. So if we can, that's my recommendation, because it's for community of interest, particularly in certain geographical areas. That data, if we can get that as soon as possible, that would be helpful.
Commissioner Mendoza.
Thank you. I think it's wonderful that the working group's putting out this information, looking to get feedback and comments. Is there a working group recommendation, or is it sort of being just put out here is there going to be a recommendation on what to do, sort of plan A, plan B maybe, or what's the...
Well, I'll tell you, this was supposed to be a discussion that could result in approving one of these things as something we support. So maybe at the end of this discussion, I'll ask for a motion to approve one or two of these things, but I'd like to hear what the commissioners think first.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I could just jump in here on a procedural issue, I don't know, because we did not list on the agenda approval. We just had an update on legislative options. So I don't know that we can approve one of these with a vote tonight, given that agenda description.
All right. Well, if it's a no, then we can't. If it's okay. All right. Thank you for that, Holly. Should have made it more clear.
I think we could come back by the next meeting, which is 3 weeks away, with a specific proposal. Sure. It doesn't sound to me like there's a strong undercurrent here among the other commissioners that this date is the most sacred one and we should try to trim 2 days here and not 3 days there. That the working group should get specific about what we think is really the most viable.
Okay, I mean, if there's no other reactions to any of this, I will say, Holly, I did intend, by meeting the public notice deadline for this particular handout, to provide for perhaps adoption of a position in support of one of the options. But if it wasn't exactly mentioned correctly on the agenda, that's fine. I'm fine with Commissioner Stetcher's suggestion. He's the other member of our working group, that we come back with a concrete recommendation. Does anybody have any clarifying questions on how any of the things that are up there on the screen now would work? Because we could certainly entertain those and discuss that. Okay, hearing none, I will close my subcommittee, my ad hoc working group report. Thank you all for considering these things, and we'll bring you more specifics next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Holtzman. And then the final working group we haven't heard from yet is the education working group. And why don't we hear from the lead on that, Commissioner Mendoza.
Thank you, Co-Chair Maeda. There's not a whole lot that's changed since our last meeting. This is it is the look ahead, what we have scheduled on the 14th. We have legislative process. We're trying to work through the details of possibly getting county council to come and speak to us. And also the working groups, formerly called coalition. You can see the names and the organizations that represent that working group. We're going to hear from them. So I'm very much looking forward to that. On the 28th, we have Dr. Sonnenschein, excuse me. And then on the 12th, we'll get the oral presentations, the candidate finalists associated with the RFP and selection process. And then May 26th, we'll hear lessons learned from the Los Angeles County Board of Redistricting Committee. So I'm also looking very much forward to that. That's what we have thus far. If there's ideas that any of you all have about who we should get, who we should look to secure as to speak to us as a group, please let myself or Commissioner Vento know, and we'll see what we can do. Thank you.
I believe, I'm sorry. I believe Commissioner Stetcher has a clarifying question.
Thank you. It's not so much who, but what. So on the previous slide, you indicated that a number of these community-based organizations were going to come and talk with us and all, and I really want to know what we're asking them to tell us. I think it would be less important to know about their founding and more important to know about areas in the community where they can start talking about people who share common interests, things focused on our mission.
Right. The idea was, well, they actually had requested to speak, and we want to know the what, who, why, where, as much information as we can to utilize in what our charge is. So if you have specific questions that you think should be asked, certainly we can have those put out to these groups in preparation.
If I may, the communication that went out to them was clearly in that spirit, Commissioner Stetcher, that many of these organizations have been coming and speaking to you. We are highly reliant on forming these working relationships with these various groups. So indeed, you will need to hear from them in terms of who are their constituents, who they represent, what their interests are in terms of redistricting, and how they can help and support the process. So that was clearly communicated.
Thank you. That's good to know. That's what we want to know.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Mendoza. Co-Chair Williams, future agenda items.
Okay, are there any items for future agendas? If not, we'll move to the Executive Director's report.
Okay. I have just a couple of updates. Right now, Ty Lee, your clerk, is working with the co-chairs and with Holly and myself in developing a simple survey that you could complete if you do a presentation, that you could fill out where it was, the date, the audience, the organization. It also has a section that if you happen to have had an ex parte conversation, you would then indicate what that entailed. So there would be one form. A table would be generated and would be posted then for our meetings and shared with the public. So we're working on that. Again, I have a reminder, if anyone out there in the public know of demographers or people who are experts in voter polarization analysis, I would love to get their email so we can make sure we distribute the survey. Some other quick updates in terms of the workshops. You all heard Kathay Feng say it should be a larger network of organizations that we're reaching out to. So this last week, we sent the bulletin about the workshops for the CBOs and with the community-based groups, the faith-based groups, the cities, government agencies, and educational enterprises. It went out to 6,000 emails. This has grown from 50 in December, just to give you an idea of how this is expanding. I also need to tell you of another interesting update. Commissioner Mendoza is 10 years younger than the registrar recorder had reported him as. So when this was brought to our attention, I've updated the information about the selection. So we have the appropriate age for Commissioner Mendoza posted, and it had a slight shift in terms of you being a younger commissioner than was originally, a younger commission than was originally mentioned. So those are my main updates. Anything else? I see Commissioner Holtzman has a question.
Yes, thanks. Gayla, you thoughtfully asked for my feedback on the form. I gave you some feedback, including my difficulty using a Google form, which is how you had it when you sent it over to me. The main thing I just wanted to bring up now is, first of all, two things. One, I assume this is a supplemental form to make it easier for commissioners to report if they find it's easier to use the form. But it's not required under our bylaws. And second, I do want to make sure that anything that's submitted via the form is not automatically posted to the internet. I would like to make sure that the clerk has to look at the material and redact any personal or otherwise sensitive information before it gets posted. That's the way San Diego does it. San Diego, I commend to all the other commissioners that they look at the way San Diego has posted its ex parte communications log and its format, where it's written in sort of a third person description of what happened. But the key thing I just wanted to mention is that if you then go and you download their log, which is a PDF of a spreadsheet plus attachments, the attachments are themselves PDFs, usually of email chains, and you will see that there's information in those emails that's been redacted. You can see the black lines before it's sent to the web. So I would like to make sure that there's some manual review of what's submitted before it's posted, and I think the clerk could do that.
Okay, and Commissioner Holtzman, because of your useful feedback, we will take that into consideration and incorporate that, which is why we're going to wait till the next meeting to really come back with what seems to make the most sense. And I think that makes very good sense to have it be in a third person and to definitely have it reviewed before it's posted.
Thank you.
Commissioner Morales.
In the spirit of time travel here, my age is also off by a year.
Oh, no.
But unfortunately, it's in the wrong direction. So I'm actually older.
At the time of your application.
Yeah.
So I'm to add a year.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We could do that. Interesting. Anything else? So that's the end of my report.
Okay, thank you very much, Gayla, and thank Ty as well for a great job as clerk. Anything else we need to take up for the good of the order? Then
Yes.
let's.
I do.
Sorry. Yes.
Can I
Mr.
just
Bento.
enter in? Thank you, Commissioner Co-Chair Maeda. I think you will appreciate this. I think it is important to enter into the public record that both UCLA and USC basketball teams have advanced to the Sweet 16. Unfortunately, Holly, UCLA women's basketball team lost to the Texas Longhorns tonight. So that was kind of depressing for the citizens of Los Angeles. I just want to let you know that. Thank you.
Not unfortunate for Holly.
Okay, anything else? Then let's stand adjourned. And for the next regular meeting is 3 weeks from today. Thank you very much for all your hard work, everybody. And thanks to the public for tuning in if you're still around.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.